The shrill, piercing scream of the heart monitor cut through the sterile silence of the intensive care unit, sending every nurse and physician into motion. The green heartbeat tracing dissolved into a single, unforgiving line. 3 of the military's finest trauma surgeons had already exhausted every option available to modern medicine. The shattered Navy SEAL lying on the bed had survived the battlefield, multiple surgeries, and a transcontinental evacuation, yet his own body was now surrendering from within. His pulse was gone. His blood pressure had vanished. Every monitor declared the same grim verdict. Death was only moments away. Then, as the room erupted into another desperate resuscitation attempt, the newest nurse quietly stepped to his bedside. She leaned close enough that only the unconscious soldier could hear her and whispered a single classified word. Everything changed. 3 days earlier, a cold October rain swept across the runway at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. At exactly 0300 hours, the massive gray C-17 Globemaster touched down with unusual urgency. The flight line, normally alive with maintenance crews and transport personnel, was almost deserted. Waiting instead stood a hand-picked military medical extraction team beside an ambulance, with its emergency lights silently flashing against the rain-soaked pavement. They weren't waiting for an ordinary casualty. Official paperwork identified the patient only as John Doe, but several intelligence officers standing nearby, each carrying encrypted satellite phones, knew his true identity. Chief Petty Officer Colin Hayes, one of America's most highly classified Tier 1 Navy SEAL snipers. For nearly 8 months, he had operated deep inside an unnamed region of the Sahel on missions so secret they officially never existed. When the aircraft's rear ramp lowered, the smell of jet fuel mixed instantly with fresh blood. Flight medics rushed the stretcher down the ramp while performing uninterrupted CPR. "We're losing him," one medic shouted over the screaming engines. Blood pressure 50 by palpation. Heart rate 40 and deteriorating. 3 rounds of epinephrine administered. No response. Inside Trauma Bay 1, Colonel Dr. Harrison Mitchell waited with his surgical team. Mitchell had spent over 20 years repairing soldiers who should never have survived combat. He had treated Special Forces operators, Delta Force commandos, Marine raiders, and countless SEALs. Very little unsettled him anymore, until he saw Colin Hayes. The veteran surgeon stopped for half a second. The injuries were catastrophic. A high-caliber rifle round had shattered Colin's right shoulder before tearing through his upper chest. RPG shrapnel had ripped into both legs. Severe burns had fused sections of his combat uniform directly into his skin. Multiple broken ribs threatened to puncture what remained of his lungs. "Move," Mitchell barked. The trauma room exploded into organized chaos. Chest tubes, massive transfusion protocol, emergency intubation, O-negative blood, rapid ultrasound, portable x-rays. Every specialist fought against the clock, yet something impossible began happening. Each life-saving medication produced the opposite effect. Every dose of epinephrine slowed Colin's already failing heart instead of strengthening it. Whenever ventilator pressure increased to improve oxygen delivery, his vocal cords violently spasmed, choking off airflow. His blood vessels constricted despite overwhelming blood loss, starving his own organs. Nothing followed normal human physiology. Mitchell stared helplessly at the monitors. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "He's in hemorrhagic shock, but his nervous system is behaving like he's preserving himself from hypothermia. It's as if his body has reversed every survival instinct." Nobody had an explanation. Standing quietly near the medication cart was Abigail Carter. Most people simply called her Abby. At 32 years old, she looked like any experienced ICU nurse, calm, observant, and remarkably composed under pressure. She had transferred from Chicago only 3 weeks earlier. Few people knew her past. Buried beneath heavy security clearances, inside her personnel file, was a classified record from Fort Meade. Before becoming a nurse, Abby had spent 6 years as a National Security Agency Signals Intelligence analyst attached to Joint Special Operations Command. Her specialty had never been computers alone. She had studied interrogation resistance, neurological conditioning, stress physiology, and the extreme psychological training used by America's most secretive military units. Following a disastrous deployment in Afghanistan that left several teammates dead, Abby resigned. She wanted to heal people instead of helping wage invisible wars. Watching Colin's treatment unfold, an uneasy realization settled into her stomach. The surgeons weren't making mistakes. They simply misunderstood their patient. Everyone saw a critically wounded soldier. Abby saw something different. She recognized the unmistakable signs of deeply conditioned autonomic programming, a level of neurological control almost impossible to believe. Some elite operators were trained to compartmentalize pain, suppress fear, and survive torture. But rumors occasionally circulated through intelligence circles about an experimental protocol, a final defensive measure. If captured under certain classified circumstances, the operator's subconscious could force the body into a catastrophic shutdown, preventing interrogation or exploitation. No physician would ever diagnose such a condition, because officially, it did not exist. Over the next 72 hours, Colin continued slipping away. The surgeons successfully stopped every internal bleed. His infections remained under control. His oxygen levels improved. Yet one organ after another slowly began failing. His kidneys weakened. His liver deteriorated. Brain scans resembled those of a patient trapped in an irreversible coma. Military commanders quietly arrived from Virginia. Private meetings were held behind closed conference room doors. Discussions shifted away from treatment toward end-of-life decisions. By the third night, almost everyone believed Colin Hayes had already lost his final battle. Abby began her overnight ICU shift shortly after midnight. The hospital corridors had grown silent. Only the rhythmic hiss of ventilators and the soft electronic beeping of monitors disturbed the darkness. She approached Colin's bedside carrying a warm washcloth. Most of his body remained hidden beneath thick white dressings and surgical tubing. Only his left hand rested uncovered beside the bed rail. She gently cleaned away dried antiseptic, soot, and old blood from his fingers. Looking closely, she noticed how young he actually appeared beneath the bruises and breathing tube. But the deep lines surrounding his eyes revealed years spent staring through a sniper scope at humanity's darkest moments. "Were you fighting?" she whispered softly. There was no response. She reached for his medical chart. Page after page documented failure, persistent coma, progressive multi-organ dysfunction, minimal neurological activity, palliative care strongly recommended. Abby sighed and closed the folder. Then she noticed it. His left index finger moved. Barely. Tap. She froze. Perhaps it was only a random muscle contraction. Several seconds passed. Nothing. She turned away. Then it happened again. Tap. Tap. Pause. Tap. 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 Pause. Tap. Not random. Not involuntary. It was deliberate. A pattern. And suddenly Abby recognized it. Someone inside the coma was trying desperately to communicate. Abby's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the entire ICU seemed to disappear around her. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors faded into the background as memories from a life she had buried years ago came rushing back. Endless hours inside secure intelligence rooms, intercepted battlefield transmissions, coded distress signals, and desperate messages tapped through prison walls by captured operatives. She stared at Colin's trembling finger. It wasn't a muscle spasm. He was communicating. Without taking her eyes off his hand, Abby reached into the pocket of her scrubs, pulled out a pen, and grabbed a paper napkin from the bedside table. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she carefully recorded every tiny movement. Tap. Pause. Tap tap. Long pause. Another tap. At first, she tried translating the pattern into traditional Morse code. The letters came out as meaningless fragments. She frowned, crumpled the napkin, and immediately started over. Then realization struck like lightning. This isn't Morse. Her whisper barely escaped her lips. It was a modified military tap code, a classified communication system taught only to operators who completed the highest level of SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. Designed for prisoners who had no voice, no radio, and no hope except tapping coded messages through concrete walls. Very few civilians had ever seen it. Abby had. Years earlier, while assigned to classified intelligence operations, she had spent countless nights decoding recordings exactly like this one. Her pen moved rapidly across the page as Colin continued tapping. Every pause mattered. Every tiny movement formed another letter. Slowly, the message appeared. Compromised. Another sequence followed. Exfil denied. Abby's stomach tightened. A third message emerged. Hold position. She slowly lowered the pen. Her heart sank. The truth was suddenly horrifyingly clear. Colin wasn't unconscious because of irreversible brain damage. His mind was fully alive. It was trapped. During his final mission, something catastrophic had happened. His team had almost certainly been ambushed, badly wounded and expecting capture. His years of survival conditioning had taken control. His brain had activated the ultimate defensive protocol to protect classified intelligence. His subconscious had forced his body into an extreme state of shutdown. His heart slowed. His nervous system withdrew. His awareness retreated into a fortress where no interrogator could reach him. He wasn't lying safely inside a German hospital. Not in his mind. He still believed he was somewhere in the desert, surrounded by enemy fighters, waiting to torture him for information. Every needle felt like another interrogation. Every painful procedure confirmed his fears. The bright lights above him became interrogation lamps. The constant electronic beeping transformed into hostile radio chatter. Even the doctors trying to save him looked, to his conditioned mind, like enemy captors. That explained everything. Why the adrenaline made his body resist. Why he fought the ventilator. Why every treatment pushed him deeper into physiological collapse. He wasn't rejecting medical care. He was resisting capture. "Oh my God," Abby whispered. The heavy ICU doors suddenly swung open. Dr. Harrison Mitchell entered with two senior naval officers dressed in formal service uniforms. Exhaustion covered the surgeon's face after 3 relentless days of fighting for a patient who refused to survive. "Nurse Carter," Mitchell said quietly while reviewing the latest laboratory reports. "His kidneys have completely failed. Blood pressure continues to fall despite maximum support." He looked toward the officers before continuing. "The command has authorized comfort care." The words hit Abby like a physical blow. "We're discontinuing the vasopressors," Mitchell said. "Then we'll remove the ventilator." Without thinking, Abby stepped directly between the doctors and Colin's bed. "You can't." The room fell silent. Mitchell looked up sharply. "Excuse me. He's not brain dead," Abby said firmly. "He's communicating." The surgeon's patience had nearly vanished. "Abigail, we've performed every neurological test available. His EEG shows almost no meaningful activity. Please step aside." "No," she replied. "He's executing a SEER survival protocol." She held up the napkin covered in coded notes. "Look at his finger. He's sending compromised reports. He believes he's been captured." One of the naval officers, Captain Reynolds, narrowed his eyes. "How do you recognize classified SEER tap codes?" Abby met his stare without hesitation. "Because before I became a nurse, I decoded them for Joint Special Operations Command." The room froze. No one spoke. Abby turned back toward Dr. Mitchell. "You've surrounded him with bright lights, constant alarms, painful procedures, and unfamiliar faces. Everything you've done is medically correct." She took a slow breath, but to his conditioned mind, her voice became almost a whisper. "You've recreated the perfect enemy interrogation chamber." Dr. Mitchell looked from Abby to the 2 military officers standing beside him. His exhausted face showed equal parts frustration and disbelief. "Even if you're somehow right," he said, rubbing a hand across his forehead. "And that's an enormous medical stretch. His organs are shutting down. His blood pressure is collapsing. We have only minutes before his heart stops completely." He stared directly at her. "So tell me, Nurse Carter, how exactly do you wake someone from psychological prison?" Abby's mind raced. "We don't treat his body," she answered. "We reach his mind. We have to convince him the mission is over." Captain Reynolds frowned. "With what?" he demanded. "His operational file is almost completely redacted. We don't know his team's call signs, mission codes, or extraction procedures. The Pentagon isn't going to release classified information over an unsecured line. Abby looked down at Colin. His breathing had become shallow and uneven. The monitor beside him emitted slow warning tones as his heart rate slipped lower. 30, 28, 25. Each beat came farther apart than the last. He was disappearing. Closing her eyes, Abby forced herself to remember fragments from her intelligence days. Faces, intercepted communications, encrypted battlefield recordings. Then one memory surfaced. A classified transcript from years earlier. An elite sniper team surrounded somewhere in Somalia. She remembered one calm voice directing air support while completely cut off from friendly forces. She remembered the nickname enemy fighters had whispered with fear, the ghost of the sands. More importantly, she remembered the extraction authentication phrase attached to that operation. It was little more than a fragment. If her memory was wrong, she'd simply be whispering meaningless words to a dying soldier. If she was right, she might reach the man trapped inside his own mind. Without another word, Abby stepped past Dr. Mitchell. She leaned over Colin's bed, placing both hands firmly on his uninjured shoulder. She applied steady pressure, exactly the way combat rescue personnel stabilized wounded operators during helicopter extractions. Her face moved close to his ear. Her voice became calm, confident, steady. "It's over, brother," she whispered. "The perimeter is secure. You've been extracted. Your wheel's up." She paused, then quietly spoke the phrase she prayed he would recognize. "Come home, Whiskey Actual." The ICU became completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Only the painfully slow beep, beep, beep echoed through the room. Dr. Mitchell sighed heavily. "Nurse Carter, step away." She didn't move. Instead, she tightened her grip slightly. "I have the watch now," she whispered. "Stand down, Whiskey Actual." For one endless second, nothing happened. Then every monitor in the room exploded with sound. The sluggish heartbeat vanished. A sharp spike flashed across the cardiac screen. Beep. Another. Beep. Then another. Beep. 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 Colin's entire body arched violently off the mattress. His left hand shot upward with astonishing speed, grabbing the front of Abby's scrubs. His grip was unbelievably powerful. Despite 3 days of critical illness, his fingers locked like steel. The ventilator hissed loudly. Then his eyes flew open. They weren't dull. They weren't confused. They were sharp, focused, wide with pure survival instinct. For a heartbeat, he stared directly into Abby's eyes. His pupils were enormous, scanning her face as though identifying friend from enemy. His chest fought against the ventilator while his heart rate surged upward. 40, 70, 100, 130, 140. The room froze. Only seconds earlier, they had been watching a man die. Now, they were watching him fight his way back into consciousness. Dr. Mitchell recovered first. "He's going into extreme sympathetic overload," he shouted. 5 milligrams of midazolam. Now. A nurse reached for the medication. "No." Abby's voice cut across the room. She threw herself between the 4 lines and the approaching syringe. "No sedatives." Mitchell stared at her in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" "If you sedate him now," Abby said urgently, "his conditioned survival response will interpret it as chemical restraint. He'll believe he's been captured again." She pointed toward Colin, whose breathing had become rapid but purposeful. His nervous system barely escaped that shutdown once. Force him back into it, and he may never come out. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his expression hard. "Nurse Carter," he barked. "Stand aside immediately. You are interfering with medical treatment. I am preventing him from retreating back into the psychological bunker that's been killing him for 3 days." Abby shot back. Colin continued thrashing against the bed. His frightened eyes darted around the brightly lit ICU. Every machine, every unfamiliar face, every flashing monitor. To everyone else, it looked like a wounded patient waking from a coma. But Abby recognized something entirely different. He wasn't seeing doctors. He wasn't seeing a hospital. He still believed he was surrounded by enemy interrogators, and unless someone convinced him he was finally safe, the battle for his life was only beginning. Colin gagged violently, fighting against the thick endotracheal tube lodged deep in his throat. Every instinct in his body screamed to remove it. As he twisted, his shattered right shoulder shifted against the mattress, sending a fresh bloom of blood through the white surgical bandages. His eyes darted wildly around the room. To everyone else, he was looking at hospital walls. To Abby, it was obvious he saw something completely different. His pupils were wide with adrenaline, scanning every corner, every doorway, every face. He wasn't searching for doctors. He was searching for threats, calculating escape routes, identifying possible interrogators. She knew she had only seconds before the overwhelming surge of panic pushed his already battered heart beyond its limit. Abby stepped directly into his field of vision. She leaned close until there was no possibility he could look anywhere else. Whiskey Actual. Her voice became calm, firm, and unmistakably authoritative. Eyes on me. His frantic gaze shifted toward her. You are at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. She spoke each sentence slowly. You are in Germany. You've been recovered. You are secure. For several agonizing seconds, Colin simply stared. The panic in his expression didn't disappear. Instead, it transformed. The wild terror faded into something colder, more dangerous, professional suspicion. He stopped struggling against the restraints. Instead, his left hand rose deliberately toward his face, ignoring Abby completely. His fingers wrapped around the breathing tube, protruding from his mouth. He's pulling his airway, a young nurse shouted. Several staff members rushed forward. Stop, Abby yelled. Everyone froze. She turned toward Dr. Mitchell. Deflate the cuff. The surgeon hesitated. If he removes it himself, he won't stop until it's out. Abby interrupted. If you fight him, he'll tear his airway apart. Mitchell looked at the monitors, then at Abby, then back at Colin's determined grip, muttering a curse under his breath. He grabbed a syringe and quickly deflated the cuff, holding the tube inside the trachea. The instant the pressure released, Colin pulled. The long plastic tube slid free with a wet, sickening sound before landing across the floor. He rolled onto his side, coughing violently. Blood and saliva splattered onto the sheet as his lungs struggled through their first independent breaths in nearly 3 days. The room fell completely silent. Dr. Mitchell still held the unused sedative syringe. Captain Reynolds instinctively reached toward the empty space where his service pistol would normally rest. Nobody moved. After nearly a minute, Colin slowly leaned back against the pillows. His breathing remained rough and uneven. His throat had been scraped raw by the breathing tube. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like gravel dragged across metal. One word: authentication. Abby swallowed. I already gave you your call sign, she answered quietly. Whiskey Actual. Colin's expression never changed. His eyes remained motionless. Russian intelligence knows my call sign, he rasped. He paused to cough. So do half the hostile services operating in North Africa. Another painful breath. You build a fake hospital. You dress people as American doctors. Psychological deception. His stare never left Abby. Authentication challenge. He drew another ragged breath before whispering 2 chilling words. Broken arrow. The room seemed to freeze. Identify. Abby's pulse hammered inside her chest. She recognized the phrase immediately. Broken arrow. It wasn't merely an emergency battlefield transmission. Among certain classified units, it could also serve as the opening half of an authentication exchange, a challenge requiring a precise countersign, known only to cleared personnel. Colin wasn't asking for reassurance. He was testing reality itself. If she answered incorrectly, his mind would conclude every person in the room was part of an elaborate enemy interrogation. Everything she'd accomplished would collapse. He would retreat back into the psychological fortress that had nearly killed him. Captain Reynolds stepped forward. Chief Hayes, he said firmly. I'm Captain Thomas Reynolds, United States Navy. You're safe. This is Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Colin didn't even acknowledge him. His entire focus remained fixed on Abby. Nothing else existed. His breathing slowed slightly. His eyes narrowed. Broken arrow, he whispered again. Identify. Abby felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. Dr. Mitchell. The nurses, the captain, everyone waited. Her own thoughts raced backward through years she had tried desperately to forget. She remembered the secure intelligence vaults beneath Fort Meade, the dimly lit analysis rooms, the endless recordings of encrypted battlefield traffic, voices speaking in fragments, challenge words, countersigns, authentication drills repeated thousands of times. Somewhere inside those buried memories was the answer Colin needed, if she could find it before his faith disappeared. She might save not only his life, but his mind. Abby held Colin's gaze without blinking. The challenge response codes he expected changed regularly, and she knew there was no chance she could know the current countersign. Her security clearance had expired years ago, but she also knew something more important. She understood how men like Colin were trained. "I don't know today's authentication code," Abby admitted quietly. "I haven't held a TS/SCI clearance in over 3 years." The room grew tense. Captain Reynolds looked as though he expected Colin to shut down again. Instead, Abby continued, "But I do know your sniper element operated under Task Force Black out of Camp Lemonnier." A flicker crossed Colin's face. "I know your primary extraction point was a remote airstrip outside Wallam." His breathing slowed another fraction. "And I know the last transmission your team sent before disappearing reported visual contact with 3 hostile technical vehicles approaching from the west." The silence became almost unbearable. Colin studied her face, not looking for deception anymore, looking for truth. He whispered through his damaged throat. "You're an analyst." "NSA Signals Intelligence," Abby answered. 6 years. She never looked away. "I monitored your biometric telemetry during the Mogadishu operation in 2021. Another heartbeat passed. "I know your normal resting heart rate is 42. I know you're allergic to penicillin. And I know your body nearly shut itself down because you believed dying was safer than being captured." For several long seconds, nobody in the ICU spoke. Only the steady rhythm of the cardiac monitor filled the room. Beep, beep, beep. No frantic alarms. No warning tones. Just a strong, regular heartbeat. The rigid muscles across Colin's shoulders slowly relaxed. His clenched jaw loosened. The hand that had remained ready to fight finally fell back onto the blanket. He stared toward the ceiling lights. They no longer looked like interrogation lamps. They were simply hospital lights. He whispered, struggling for breath. His voice cracked. "I'm in Germany." Abby's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she answered softly. "You're in Germany. You're safe." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Colin believed her. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward almost cautiously, as if afraid the moment might vanish. He glanced from the patient to the monitors. His eyes widened. Blood pressure 90/60. Another nurse checked the display. "It's still climbing. Heart rate 85. Oxygen saturation 94% without ventilator support." Mitchell quickly reviewed the latest readings. His expression shifted from disbelief to complete astonishment. "His circulation is improving." Another nurse checked the urinary catheter. "Doctor, urine output just restarted." Mitchell stared at Abby. It's like someone flipped a switch. Abby finally allowed herself a tired smile. Because someone did. She looked toward Colin. For 3 days his brain believed every treatment was part of an enemy interrogation. She gently squeezed his hand. The moment he accepted he was safe, his body stopped fighting to survive. The following hours transformed the ICU. Only minutes earlier, the room had prepared for a patient's final moments. Now it became the center of an aggressive effort to save him. Freed from the crushing grip of fear and survival conditioning, Colin's body finally responded to treatment. Fresh blood transfusions stabilized his circulation. Powerful antibiotics began controlling hidden infections. Orthopedic surgeons repaired damage to his shattered clavicle. Respiratory therapists carefully expanded his partially collapsed lung. Every medication that had failed before now produced exactly the response doctors expected. The difference was remarkable. Colin endured each painful procedure without complaint. He remained quiet, conserving every ounce of strength. Although his eyes occasionally drifted around the room, They always returned to Abby. She had become his anchor, his proof that reality had finally replaced nightmare. By sunrise, the gray, lifeless color had disappeared from his face. Bruises remained. Bandages covered much of his body, but the unmistakable signs of life had returned. The heart monitor maintained a calm, reassuring rhythm. Shortly after dawn, the heavy ICU doors opened once again. Captain Thomas Reynolds entered with renewed urgency. Behind him walked two intelligence officers in dark civilian suits. One carried a locked, encrypted communications case. Neither officer wore visible insignia. Their expressions revealed they had come for answers. "Chief Hayes," Reynolds announced, "you've given everyone in Washington quite a scare." He placed a secure satellite communications unit on the bedside table. "Joint Special Operations Command is standing by." Reynolds folded his arms. "Your entire six-man reconnaissance element disappeared in the Sahel." His voice hardened. "We need to know who attacked your team, and how they located operators who weren't supposed to exist." Colin slowly turned his head. His tired eyes studied each visitor. He noticed the discreet intelligence credentials hanging beneath their jackets. Then he looked directly at Reynolds. His voice remained weak, but every word carried unmistakable authority. "Clear the room." The captain frowned. "I'm sorry. I will not conduct this debrief in front of unauthorized personnel." Reynolds straightened. "Chief, I'm the senior naval officer present. You'll answer the questions." Colin never raised his voice. He didn't need to. "My mission operated under a special access program." He paused before continuing. "Need to know applies. You do not possess that authorization." The room fell silent. Captain Reynolds' face darkened. "I could recommend court-martial proceedings for refusing a lawful order." Before Colin could answer, the older intelligence officer quietly stepped forward. His silver hair contrasted sharply with his dark suit. "My name is Sterling," he said calmly. He looked toward Reynolds. "He's correct. If this operation falls under a compartmented special access program, even we cannot receive details without direct authorization from higher authority." Reynolds stared in disbelief. For the first time that morning, he realized the wounded man lying in the hospital bed wasn't merely a Navy SEAL. He was guarding secrets powerful enough that even the people sent to question him weren't cleared to hear them. Then who was he supposed to tell? Captain Reynolds demanded, his frustration echoing through the ICU. The people responsible for killing his team are still out there. Colin slowly lifted his trembling left hand. Every movement clearly caused pain, yet his finger remained steady as he pointed across the room. "At Abby." She blinked in surprise. "Me?" Colin gave a faint nod. "You." Abby shook her head. "Chief, I'm a civilian now. My security clearance expired years ago." Colin studied her quietly. "No," he said in a hoarse whisper. "You're an analyst who happens to wear nursing scrubs." The words silenced the room. "If I tell them," he continued, glancing briefly toward the officers outside the glass doors, "the report goes through standard command channels." He coughed painfully before finishing. "Standard channels are exactly why my brothers are dead." A heavy silence settled over the ICU. The older intelligence officer, Sterling, slowly folded his arms. "Are you accusing someone inside the system of leaking classified operations?" Colin's expression hardened. "I'm describing a massacre." He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting another wave of pain. When he opened them again, they locked onto Abby. "Grab a pen." His voice was barely audible. "I'm only saying this once." Reynolds looked ready to argue, but Sterling raised a hand. Without another word, the intelligence officers stepped outside, allowing the heavy ICU doors to seal behind them. Only Abby and Colin remained. She pulled a medical notepad from the bedside cart and sat carefully beside him. Her pulse raced with a familiar intensity she hadn't experienced since leaving intelligence work. "I'm ready," she said softly. Colin stared toward the ceiling as he gathered enough strength to speak. "Our reconnaissance objective was an isolated weapons transfer site." He paused to catch his breath. "Observation only. No engagement." He swallowed painfully. Then everything changed. They didn't discover us by accident. His voice remained calm despite the memory. A professional force executed a perfect U-shaped ambush. The first shots killed my spotter. We fought toward our emergency rally point. He closed his eyes briefly. They were already waiting. Abby's pen moved rapidly across the paper. So they knew exactly where you would be. They knew every movement. Colin nodded weakly. Before deployment, our communications package was modified. He looked directly at Abby. The logistics liaison insisted we change satellite frequencies. He claimed hostile electronic jamming. Abby's expression changed instantly. The new frequency wasn't secure. It wasn't compromised, Colin corrected. It was designed to betray us. Every transmission, every location report, every request, we were broadcasting directly to the enemy. A chill ran through Abby. The liaison was working for them. Colin nodded. Network code name. He took another slow breath. Goliath. The name hung in the air. When I realized what had happened, Colin continued, I understood something. If I requested a medical evacuation, the rescue helicopters would fly straight into another ambush. So I buried my radio. I activated survival protocol. I became a black box. He looked at Abby with quiet determination. My team was already gone. I refused to let another team die following my signal. His trembling hand reached toward hers. She gently took it. You can't hand this to routine channels, he whispered. If Goliath is still active, the warning disappears before anyone important sees it. Abby nodded. I understand. Use the secure contacts you still trust. Tell the right people. Tell them my team didn't fail. They were betrayed. Abby's grip tightened. I promise. I'll make sure the information reaches people who can act on it. Colin finally relaxed against the pillow. The tension that had gripped him since awakening slowly disappeared. A faint, exhausted smile crossed his face. I have the watch, he murmured. You take the message. Abby's eyes filled with emotion. I've got it, Chief. You can rest now. For the first time in days, Colin closed his eyes without fear. 3 months later, he quietly left the hospital, walking out under his own strength with only a slight limp to remind him of everything he had survived. The investigation that followed exposed a compromised intelligence network and prevented future operations from falling into the same deadly trap. Abby remained at Landstuhl, choosing to spend her days in the ICU instead of hidden intelligence facilities. She never spoke publicly about the events of that night. Some victories, she believed, were meant to remain unwritten. But every time she heard the steady rhythm of a healthy heartbeat echo through the intensive care unit, she remembered the wounded soldier who had fought his own mind before he could fight for his life. Sometimes the strongest medicine wasn't found in a syringe or a scalpel. Sometimes it was simply hearing one familiar voice reminding you that you were finally home.